the United States Supreme Court came out and said that Pennsylvania can count contested provisional ballots. Our Supreme Court rejected an emergency appeal from Republicans that would have led to thousands of provisional ballots not being counted in Pennsylvania. They say this application was presented to Alito and is denied. Republicans split wins in Pennsylvania, one victory, one loss. You see, the United States Supreme Court came out and said that Pennsylvania can count contested provisional ballots. And we read through the arguments on this case, and the explanation being that, or the battle being that there were provisional ballots that come in, and the question was, who can count them? And there was clear law that said that county recorders cannot count them, and they just interpreted that basically differently. The Republicans wanted to stop that. The Supreme Court is not allowing them to stop that, meaning the rule will stay in place. So here's what the AP reports. On Friday, our Supreme Court rejected an emergency appeal from Republicans that would have led to thousands of provisional ballots not being counted in Pennsylvania. They left in place a state Supreme Court ruling that election officials must count provisional ballots when their mail-in ballots were rejected. And there's a rule that says they can't count those. The ruling is a victory who had sought to force counties, primarily Republican-controlled counties, to let voters cast a provisional on Election Day if their mail-in ballot was rejected. While the Supreme Court action was a setback for Republicans, the GOP took victory in another case, which is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That court rejected a last-ditch effort by voting rights advocates to ensure that mail-in ballots that don't have handwritten dates could still be counted. So provisional ballots that are brought into county recorders will be counted, but ballots that do not have proper dates on them will not be counted. So kind of a one win, one loss split here. The rulings are the latest in years of litigation. Let me just show you what these rulings look like. This came out from the Supreme Court. This was the loss for the Republicans. They say this application was presented to Alito and is denied. Here's what Alito said. And Gorsuch and Thomas join, respecting the denial of the application for a stay. They say this case concerns a recent decision of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania that adopted a controversial interpretation of the Pennsylvania Code. Specifically, the court held that a provisional ballot must be counted even if the voter previously submitted an invalid mail-in ballot within the time required by law. The applicants say that this interpretation flouts the plain meaning of the Pennsylvania law, which we read through, of the election code, and that the interpretation is so far afield that it violates the Constitution. Now, seeking to prevent county election boards from following that interpretation in next week's election, the applicants ask us to stay the judgment or at least order the separation of the ballots that may be impacted. Now, the application of the state Supreme Court interpretation in the upcoming election is a matter of considerable importance. But even if we agreed with their federal constitutional argument, Alito says, a question on which I express no view at this time, we could not prevent the consequences they fear. The lower court's judgment concerns just 2 votes in the long-completed Pennsylvania primary. Staying that judgment would not impose any binding obligation on any Pennsylvania officials who are responsible for the conduct of this year's election. And because the only state election officials who are parties in this case are the members of the Board of Elections in one small county, we cannot order other election boards to sequester affected ballots. For these reasons, I agree with the order denying the application. Okay, so long story short, Alito saying, I can't do anything about this right now. Election's too close and you don't have all the necessary parties. It's not meaningful enough for us to act on because it's just basically too small and too close to the election. So you're asking for a remedy that we cannot even deliver to you because you have not brought the other counties in, and so our order will not bind them. So you're asking for kind of a statewide order, but you don't have the appropriate parties here. So those provisional ballots will now be accepted. Very short order from Alito. We've got a similar situation here, but in reverse. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, they came out and they will now deny the counting of ballots that are not properly dated on the outer seal. They say from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, so this is a victory for the Republicans, on this first day, this emergency application is granted. The stay is entered. They say the application for leave and the request to restore integrity is granted. So in other words, those ballots will not be counted. So here's some more on this. The ruling overturns a decision finding that the state law that required a handwritten date was unconstitutional. So now the law that requires a date on the ballots, it's going to be in effect, has to be on there. That's good news. Dates are important because we want ballots to come in before the election is over. And so this is a good decision, but we're kind of 50-50 out of Pennsylvania in the Supreme Court there. A good victory for Republicans. Now, meanwhile,